This is Father Patrick Briscoe.
And this is Father Bonaventure Chapman.
Welcome to Godsplaining. Thanks to all those who support us. If you enjoy our podcast, please consider making a monthly donation on Patreon. Be sure to like and subscribe to Godsplaining wherever you listen to your podcast. Father Marx Adventure.
Father Marx Adventure, yeah.
Great to be with you.
Live-splaining, but yeah.
That's right.
fair
No,
enough.
I think,
It's fine. I love names like that.
We can trade the gimmick around a little bit.
Yes.
We don't have a Marx puppet, though, do we?
We don't. We have Friedrich Nietzsche. They do make one, I suppose.
Maybe we could get a Marx puppet in the future.
Yeah, it's true.
And we'll think about that. We'll pray about it. Today's episode is going to be great as we dive into Marxism, what Marx got right, what Marx got wrong, but really taking a look at the nature of work. But before we do that, I just want to talk a little bit about one great opportunity for priests. We know we have a number of priest listeners to the podcast. It's a huge privilege, brothers, to have you tuning in. And we want to make sure that you know about the opportunity to go on retreat with Dr. Scott Hahn and Dr. John Bergsma at the St. Paul Center. The St. Paul Center, if you don't know it, is a fantastic project for the renewal of Catholic biblical theology. If you attend one of the retreats they host for priests, you will have 4 days of biblical formation, fraternity, and spiritual renewal. It's really great. It's one of the best kept secrets, I think, of priest conferences for priests in America. So there's a whole array of retreats they're offering in 2025. You can check them all out. If you're a priest, consider joining one of the 3 annual priest retreats in 2025. Visit stpaulcenter.com. That's stpaulcenter.com/priest to learn more. Sign up today. If you're a layperson, you might consider also sending a priest you love, so you could pay the expenses or help encourage a priest to take the time to go on the retreat. That might also give him the tools he needs for his Sunday homily, which will downstream affect your life for the better. So again, that information is available at stpaulcenter.com/priests. One other quick announcement. This one's about Godsplaining.
Oh.
We have an upcoming event. These are really fun when we do these in-person events. It's great to meet so many people who listen to the show. We've got a day of recollection in New York City at the fantastic St. Joseph Church in Greenwich Village. That will be on Saturday, October 19th. More information about that can be found at godsplaining.org/events.
There we go. Done. Out of the way.
All the work.
Yes.
Finished.
Yes.
Boy, it felt good. Father Bonaventure, what was the most difficult job you had growing up?
Oh, good question. Difficult. I moved large dog food bags around for a while, but that was pleasurable.
Was it a pet store?
Yeah, I was working at a pet supplies.
Well, the pet store would be a fun job.
That was fine.
Okay, so that would be...
They didn't have really animals,
That would be
though.
a difficult part of it.
I guess McDonald's, there were certain aspects that were disgusting about it.
At McDonald's?
Yeah, I worked at McDonald's. So I remember on my first day, I remember having to take out large bags of trash or something, and then had to step on them to get them into the trash bins, the big containers, and my foot went right through into just a ton of muck and such like this. I pulled it out, it's up to the knee, and this, it just got on the uniform and all this sort of thing. Now my foot's wet for the entire day and covered with this disgusting stuff. So that was gross, but but it wasn't a bad job. It was a nice, yeah. It was pleasant. Menial labor is fun, just doing random things and small cleaning tasks and making burgers and customer services. I was put on customer service quite early because I could talk reasonably with people and be friendly. So I think that's probably the most drudgery job. And you just always smelled like onions because of the refrigerators and such. And I always burn my hands on the little grill thing. Hot oil would fly everywhere, so I still have a few burns on that. But it's nothing really.
Easily the best and worst job I had was the summer after my senior year in high school. I was a camp counselor at a Boy Scouts of America camp. So that was before the Scouts for America or American Scouting or America for Scouts or whatever it is now. Back when Boy Scouting was for men. That was a great experience. So I was a waterfront counselor and then taught other traditional scouting skills like lashing and knots and how to start a fire with nothing. And
nice.
All those great life skills that
things
I
I have
use
no
every day,
idea. Yeah, well, the apocalypse happens. I'm coming to you to find out how to start a fire.
Right. So I really love that job, but by far the worst part of it was helping campers check out. And that was on Saturday mornings, and it was a couple hours of cleaning at a summer camp.
Yeah.
Which included things like, checking latrines and hauling trash and
nothing like cleaning bathrooms. Yeah.
We had a couple incidents that were every bit as disgusting as you were describing in your McDonald's.
Yeah. It's life.
But I think this episode is important because there's a lot of Marxist language in the culture today, and I think people aren't aware of just how much this impacts them in kind of radical ways. So for people just tuning into the conversation, just thinking about Marx as something other than a kind of slur or a buzzword, what is it that they need to know, Father Bonaventure? Tee this up for us.
Yeah, the first thing is, I suspect most people don't really read or understand Marx who use Marxist language. I mean, there are certain large-scale things, but under any great philosopher or any great thinker, many schools will form. So many people call themselves Aristotelian, but they might be very different from other Aristotelians. Same thing with Thomists or Kantians. True, very much so with Marxists. So you have people saying they're Marxists when actually... It's reading the text myself and teaching Marx. I teach Marx at the CUA, not explicitly. I'm not exclusively. I do teach him explicitly, Uncle Karl. But
you're not like looking to recruit people to be Marxists.
Well,
Let's clarify that.
That's
for
the
the
thing.
record.
Insofar, only insofar as Marxists are Aristotelians, yes. And it turns out there's a lot of relationship between the two. But insofar as Marxists is understood as revolutionary, kind of proletariat, take down the bourgeoisie sort of thing. They don't realize that Marx is not a revolutionary for like revolutionary's sake. He has a larger vision, which is largely tapped into what it means to be a human. When you read Marx, actually, if you read the Communist Manifesto, you get like the podcast version of someone's actual lectures. It's inflammatory. But when you actually read the 1844 manuscripts or the Preface to Political Economy or the German Ideology or whatever you might be in Marx, you realize this is a profound German thinker. And he has a real attentiveness to what it means to be a human, and that so many of his would-be disciples just aren't attentive to those aspects of it. So he has something of a similar vision to Aristotle in the sense of the point of humanity is to get to a certain flourishing. And it just so happens that he thinks that communism is that kind of utopian flourishing. But again, most people think of communism as this like socialist maybe North Korea, like everyone looking the same and sort of thing, top-down totalitarianism. And Marx has no vision for that. Marx's vision, he says it in the German Ideology, is that he wants you to be able to, I think it's hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, and critique in the evening. Like that you are free as an individual to do anything that you want to develop your capacities, to be a hunter, a fisher, and a philosopher, that everyone has this ability.
So first of all, I need to address this claim you've made that podcasts are inflammatory. We would never just sit down in front of the camera, pull up to a microphone, and start talking.
Yeah.
We would never do that.
Yes.
And say inflammatory things by that action. Okay, so then moving on though to this important claim that you laid out is that Marx actually is establishing and launching a vision of what it means to be human.
That's right. Yeah.
And in these latter points, you gave something that is not altogether offensive to me.
Right.
This idea that human life is something that comprises this balance of hunting, fishing, and critiquing.
Yeah.
Or, as we might put it, more simply, work and leisure.
And leisure, yeah. Yeah.
That they're both in there, because if you'd asked me like what's the fundamental goal of Marx, I would have said
revolution, probably, right?
Revolution. I absolutely would have said it.
That is not the end. There's a means to the end.
So you've already convicted me, corrected my interpretation there in a really important way. But this vision that he's offering of the human being is not altogether compatible. It's not altogether incompatible. Sure. It goes both ways.
Yes.
With the vision of human life as proposed by the Church, especially by Pope John Paul II.
Yes.
So one thing that I think we should do here as the conversation goes on is kind of line up some of these real points of tension or points of overlap, as they may be, as we get into them. We'll find similarities and differences. We might even find that the biggest differences are similarities.
Yes.
Who knows?
Who knew?
Anything could be possible. Yes. But we could get in. We could get into to the reality of work, how we understand it today, how John Paul II understands it, how Marx understands it, and then see downstream how some of the effects of this understanding of work and things like the development of technology influence our understanding of culture.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think if there's two, points you might want to bring about what Marx is right about, or two things that'd be helpful that we learn from Marx, and not from just Marx, but that he highlights, is the issue of work and alienation and what it means to be a human. And then, of course, the second point you could say is culture and its relationship to technology and say sub-rational processes. And the first one, he seems to be in lockstep with, say, the John Paul II, surprisingly. And the second one, we'd want to qualify a bit, although his insights are significant. So I remember this came up because while teaching, I had my students write a paper on comparing John Paul II to some of the philosophers we read, and and then I wrote a short paper for them to kind of display what might be a good idea, what it might look like, a paper, this sort of thing. And I was shocked at how, looking at John Paul II's 1981 encyclical Labor Exertions, so on human labor, human work, how Marxist it sounded after having taught and teaching Marx, and how some of the same themes about work and alienation came up. So I just titled this little thing "John Paul the Marxist" in question mark, because generally we think of John Paul II, we think of the anti-Marxist, the man who, one of the three great leaders who brought down communism in the Soviet Union and such. And so obviously anti-Marxist, and his 1991 encyclical Centesimus Annus celebrates the end of communism and Marxism in a sense. So I was shocked to find that actually deep down they have a similar vision of what it means to be human in many ways, although it gets played out very differently.
So is John Paul II a Marxist?
In a way, yes.
In a way, yes. All right, well, let's take a look here. So I've got some quotes that, I'm going to
That's great.
throw at you.
Let's do it.
I think one is very important for our understanding of the human being, right, and is fundamental to Thomists, which is that man is made in the image of God.
Yeah.
This is, of course, scriptural. It's biblical. It's part of Catholic doctrine more broadly, but is a really important idea for Thomists. John Paul II, in this encyclical letter in Labor Exertions, writes, "Man is the image of God partly through the mandate received from his Creator to subdue, to dominate the earth. Mm-hmm. In carrying out this mandate, man, every being, reflects the very action of the Creator of the universe." Part of our being made in the image of God, then, seems to mean that we must take on work. This creative responsibility we have is not just an urge we have. It's not simply an impulse, but it's part and parcel of our flourishing. And something about us is incomplete if we don't do it.
Yeah, this is right. John Paul II in that encyclical makes a good point that we are working animals, homo laborans, and that we are to do this because we are different from other animals, for instance. And you think, well, of course other animals work. Beavers make dams and sort of things. But that's not really the work that a human does. A human does a work in a way of creating something, oftentimes new, inventing, developing, whereas animals, they do work, but it's kind of moving around. It's not a project. They don't have aims and intentions other than just kind of natural instinctual stuff. What John Paul II points out is that as humans, work is not just a punishment, of course, that the quality of work and the type of work we do, that's Genesis talks about, is now taking on a certain stress and strain, but rather the fact that we are to be workers, co-vice regents, I think is one of the terms. So we rule and dominate in the way that animals don't dominate. A lion might dominate you in some ways by eating you, but it doesn't dominate you in the sense of rational control, of organizing and drawing up.
Right.
Whereas humans, when we do work, we're ideally bringing something new into fruition, and we're making a place more human and more humane.
So hear me out on this. I think that the kind of work an animal does is more like what artificial intelligence can do. Mm-hmm. So we have here at the House of Studies these big Gothic alcoves, these large entrances that lead to some of the side doors of the house. And they've had these beautiful Victorian light fixtures in them that were open to the air. And for years, birds have come and made their nests in these light fixtures. They were thwarted by our excellent procurator, the economic administrator of our community, who recently installed new light fixtures that have little hats, lids, roofs, if you will. And it is no longer possible for these birds to build their nests in the light fixtures. Anyway, what I noticed is that every year the bird built the nest in the same place in the light fixture, and the nest looked exactly the same.
Yeah.
Birds are not capable of running Zillow,
Right.
where you would produce like a whole app of houses, a whole index of creative points, right? And so animals just kind of do these things by instinct.
Yeah,
and there's a difference there, the qualitatively of what work means.
They don't transform, you could say, the structure of their life through this work.
Yes, that's right.
They do things to get things done, to sustain basic principles. Whereas man transforms not only the environment and the world around him through domination and subjugation and through the culturalization, all this, but actually himself through this. We work on ourselves as we are working. So our work expresses who we are. That's why it's not strange when you ask someone, you meet them, what their name is, and you say, "What do you do?" Now, obviously, we don't always identify with our jobs, but it seems a natural thing to ask, well, what is your work? That's not random. That has to do with you. I think this is one of the key points to Marx's critique, which is, I think, right on, or at least it's significant, and JP2 uses this language of alienation, which people are familiar with, that in Marx's critique of capitalism is that in capitalism, because of the division of labor, because of these economies of scale, we become alienated from our work, not only in the products. People always go to this first step. He has a fourfold alienation. And people think, it's just an alienated from your products. Like the workers should own more of their stuff and they shouldn't just be paid wages, but they should be able to sell so the product side of alienation. You make something and it doesn't belong to you. What belongs to you is the wages. Really, all your labor belongs to you. But Marx actually has 4 alienation points, and that's the simplest one, the product one. He also says that we're alienated from our producing. So this is what JP2 calls the subjective side of work. So our work, when it becomes in certain capitalistic systems and division of labor, so monotonous that it could be done by a machine, then is it really human work?
Right.
And Marx says what capitalism tends to do, because of its economies of scale, is to make work inhuman. Not just like factory labels, dangers, but actually just pulling a lever all the time. If you could be replaced with a machine, then that work is not expressing homo laborans, who you are.
Right. Let's get a little bit more into this because, as we were talking about our summer jobs, there's some things about that kind of work that's difficult, but also we want to say that a job like that is actually good for us, in growth. I'm sure your father would say that it was good for you to work at McDonald's. My father would say,
it was good.
That it was good for me to have worked at the summer camp. Maybe John Paul II's father said it was good for you to work at the quarry.
Yes.
Maybe President Biden's father said it was good for him to have learned to drive a Mack truck.
There you go.
Or whatever story is being told there. So the reality is that there's a certain growth that can happen from even pretty menial work. So refine that point a little bit. What's the difference between that kind of argument of the way that even a kind of simplistic work builds character and the argument you're advancing, which is that kind of work actually is alienating from our identity as human beings?
Well, so, and this is a danger with, and this is where I would critique Marx, or at least raise questions about him, is that Marx seems to have everything from a bottom-up perspective, so that your consciousness and your free choices to take on things to shape even how your own awareness of work is. He's not interested in that. It's the work is driving everything from bottom up. Whereas we believe that we have a rational soul, spiritual and material, blah, blah, blah. We can take work up into us just like we take our passions up to us and redirect them. So even in the menial job, although, and this is a good point, it drives towards or can easily fall into inhuman, I'm just a cog in the wheel kind of thing. One, at some point, can also draw up those jobs and see oneself as learning the virtues from them, of responsibility, of taking pride in particular things, which is a subjective work. So it's not just putting in time, but it can be that. But what I think Marx is right is that the more menial the task gets, the more it requires of someone to do the hard subjective work of making this a valuable occupation. I think we've all met people who take what we would think of as menial tasks or minimum wage jobs very seriously because they take pride in that and they see the virtues of that. But it's not a given, and those people are not the majority. Marx is right, I think, to say that the majority will just kind of slouch towards Gomorrah in this way.
Right. John Paul II says, because as the image of God, man is a person, that is to say, a subjective being capable of acting in a planned and rational way, capable of deciding about himself and with a tendency to self-realization. As a person, man is therefore the subject of work.
Yeah.
And so what I hear you advancing is saying that this is really important because of our rationality,
Yeah.
because of the way that allows us to orient the horizons of our life and to perfect ourselves, to build up virtues, which of course rely on our rationality, and make us more completely who we are. I love this example though that you're pointing to, the sort of person that does a job that might seem simple but does it very well. I mean, we're becoming increasingly reliant on certain kinds of what might be described as blue collar labor, but
Yes.
but are increasingly less so because of the remuneration which is being afforded them. But jobs like plumbing, heating, cooling, these are great jobs. They're very noble,
Yeah.
and they're I think noble for this reason, because they afford man to use his rationality. Like you call in a plumber, you've got a problem.
Yeah.
You need someone who can solve a problem in a way that a machine, as of yet, can't diagnose a problem. And so for that reason, plumbing is kind of glorious work because it engages rationality, right? The problem solving, and then the self-realization. We're depending on the plumber. All of society needs this man. It needs this job.
Yeah. And that is the subjective side of things, that man is not for work, but work is for man. It's like Sabbath and the Son of Man, right? So that work is intended to do work on us. Like when we're doing, this is the difference between poiesis, the making, and praxis, the doing, right? So when we're working, it's not just a making of something external object, rather it's a doing that shapes us. And the concern of both JP2 and Marx is that this can, in the modern economy, become forgotten and drudgery, and the way it shapes us can actually be vicious in that way. Now, this is not against, of course, capitalism as a economic system, but a danger in it is that it can alienate not only our products from us, but again, our producing, and even who we are. Marx talks about this deeper alienation of our Gattungswesen, the species being, the sense that we are beings that are rational, and that by certain work and inattentiveness to that work as a subjective force, we are actually becoming less rational, becoming more just like regular humdrum animals. So our species, the human species, is falling down into lower species.
Yeah, I will say this is one of the reasons why I like in Germany the fact that people wear uniforms, they wear them proudly. I like this very much because you can see a kind of nobility behind the sort of work that's done and the recognition of this, and workers walking with a clean uniform. There's something very distinguished about it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Okay, now to plug into though and go a little bit
Second
deeper
point,
into this point that you've raised, you suggested that one of the concerns here with Marx though is that things get impacted in culture from the bottom up.
Yes.
That there are effects to a kind of understanding of work that find their way into our culture. And John Paul II is very concerned, especially about the way that work impacts family life. So
Yes.
I'm wondering if you can show us a little bit about what Marx was or wasn't concerned about the family, and how John Paul II does or doesn't agree
Yeah,
with.
here's another insight that I think is helpful to Marx, and that we need to extend with him to just critique a little bit with JP2, because JP2 has a notion of freedom that Marx doesn't have, and we'll get to that in a second. But first is that Marx has this idea that the cultural life, social life, philosophical life, all of that is a third level. It's like the third level in a house. It's built upon an economic structure level, so the way we trade money and our products and things. And that's built on the basement, the fundamental core of just technology and productive forces, the way energy is organized. And he thinks that actually it's all bottom up, such that when technology is moving forward, the productive forces demand a new economy. Revolutions happen because the old economy isn't ready for this, and so it fetters it. But the cash value, of course, is that above it, the conscious life stuff, family, society, cultures, that's all just growing out from the battle between the economic and the technological stuff. So that, in a sense, it's not chosen, but rather just determined by this way in a materialistic sense. Now, from the Catholic side of things, we want to say that actually freedom has a top-down aspect that we can determine downward in our conscious life. But what I do think is important about Marx's vision is that if we're not careful, it is true that the bottom-up stuff can determine the top-down stuff. So, for instance, Marx raises questions about the family, and he has a critique of the bourgeois family, the traditional family, father, son, and mother, and all of this. And his critique is that this is a family structure fitted for an older economy, for a feudalistic agrarian kind of economy with, mom at home being able to take care of kids and all this, and dad out working the fields. That's the reason why we think of the traditional family, is because of the traditional economic structure. But with capitalism and with whatever might come next, now that we've treating men and women the same, factory work, children in factories, now that we change the economic structures and production things, actually it's not surprising that our notions of divorce and family life and roles have also been changed. What's interesting is he thinks that's deterministic in the sense that, you can't fight it. I think we want to say with JP2, because of freedom, because we do have an immaterial aspect that helps top-down business, is to say it's a threat. It's a danger. And we'd be lying to ourselves if we didn't think that our economic structures and the ways of our economic production relate and have effects, if we're not careful, on how we think about family structures and societal structures and cultural structures. And I think Marx pulls back the curtain a little bit and helps us see that actually there can be a real bottom-up formation here that we slide into if we're not attentive to.
So to begin to wrap up here, so what do listeners need to walk away from? What's the greatest similarity between John Paul II and Karl Marx, and what's the greatest difference?
I think the greatest similarity has got to be the focus on work as being a part of our essence. That work isn't something that we're stuck with for now, but rather working is a subjective aspect of being who we are, and therefore how we work and in what ways we work and how we conceive ourselves as working is important to who we are. That seems to be the similarities between them. The difference, of course, I think, is that for Marx, you have a sort of deterministic, materialistic determination of all things, such that the future societal structures, religion, morality, all of that's really determined by technology and economics battling it out in those lower floors of life. Whereas JP2 wants to say, actually, we have freedom. We can say no to particular types of organizations of society, and even we can say no in our own lives to particular sort of cultural arrangements. And that's not a matter of fettering the productive forces, but actually directing them to where they ought to be because of the notions of original sin that Marx is probably not inclined to think are very significant, we do take very seriously.
In conclusion, join the revolution, sort of.
Yes.
Friends, I just want to thank you for tuning in for this episode of Godsplaining. Follow us on Facebook, the social media platform, X, Instagram, and wherever else we are. Like, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review. If you'd like to make a donation to our podcast, you can do so through Patreon. Follow the link in the description. You can also follow links in the description to shop Godsplaining merch and to get information on upcoming Godsplaining events, like our Day of Recollection on October 19th in New York City at St. Joseph's Church in Greenwich Village. In the meantime, friends, we are working for you. We are praying for you. We ask that you would pray for us. God bless.
Father Gregory.
'Tis I.
How many goldfish did you have growing up?
I think like 3, one mostly at state fairs. They didn't last too long, and I flushed them.
Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Godsplaining.